Hi, so this is our group project on feudalism for History 101. First, the introduction. So feudalism was not just the agricultural serfdom that comes to mind when you hear the word. It was a complex society based on gifts of land, oaths, and loyalty. The key characteristics are the presence of fiefs, gifts of land usually, and the vassal who received the fief, as well as the complex relationship of the lords in their castles and the knights who guarded them. Finally, a key characteristic of feudalism is the rise of monarchy. Next is fiefs and vassals. Fiefs were gifts of land usually, but could be revenues from a toll or mill, or an annual sum of money, while a vassal was a payment of homage to a lender of the fief. Fiefs. Fiefs came with labor from peasants who were there to nurture the land. They came with rent, dignities, and offices. The person in charge of the fief was called a vassal, who worked to protect the king. The fief was given to the vassal, followed by a commendation ceremony, which formed a long-lasting relationship between the vassal and his lord. Within the service, the vassal takes an oath to be forever loyal to his lord. Vassals. The vassal, after taking the oath to protect his lord, had the duty to return the favor of the lord by military, judicial, and administrative work. A vassal, or also known as a liege, was a free man who was given a fief from a lord to whom he paid homage and swore fealty. A vassal could be a lord of the manor, but was also directly subservient to the noble or monarch. In military services, some vassals were given tenure in exchange for the performance of multiple duties. The jobs they typically worked were agriculture, but could also be in other forms, such as a personal attendance to the lord. Others were given scutage, which was when the vassal agreed to pay money of the military service. Priests were given other forms in exchange for their religious services. Knights and oaths. Knights were held in a very high position in the feudal society. They were placed under lords. However, knights were always addressed as sir. These lords would reward their kings with income and land. Reward their knights with income and land. And since knights were so beneficial for a kingdom, one could find knights living in many manor houses. Knights were hired by lords to protect castles. Many held rights to their own lands and not owing anything to the duke or lord of that territory. This is a better view of what it would look like in that time. Next is sworn oaths. Training for knighthood began at the age of 8 years old, when a young boy was sent to a castle to become a page. A page was a student and servant of an experienced knight who worked for this knight for many years. While being a student of this experienced knight, the young boy would learn more than just fighting. More specifically, he would learn horsemanship, reading, singing, chess, and the art of falconry. Eventually, later on in the boy's journey, he would compete in tournaments. This is where knights and learning knights would learn skills for combat. However, knights often got severely injured while participating in these tournaments. These lords and knights would fulfill their duty by swearing an oath of service to their lords. Therefore, they would serve their lords, which would eventually show their loyalty to them. Hired warriors. Knights were needed in feudalism. Knights were thought of as hired warriors because they were hired by the lords. They were very educated, and this is because they came from wealthy families. They were known for their skilled military expertise, and for those reasons they were necessary for a castle to function. Monarchy. In feudalism, the knight or the monarch ruled the whole kingdom and owned all of the land in the country. Because of this, the king had total control over all assets. Therefore, he would be able to decide how much quantity of land or territory to provide on lease to the barons. Since kings were giving away territory, the barons had to swear an oath before taking up a granted land or lease, so as to remain faithful and loyal to the king at all times. However, in case of any of the barons exhibited poor performance, the king had the power to withdraw the granted land and give it on lease to any other person belonging to the baron's class. All the judicial power was in the hands of the king. This picture shows the triangle of monarchy. At the top lies the king. As stated before, he has control over all assets, and underneath him lie the nobles. The nobles consisted of the wealthy, which meant they had ownership of lots of land and territory. The nobles can also be known as counts or lords, and underneath of the nobles were the knights. The knights were raised in wealthy families, but obviously not as wealthy as the nobles. They carried out a lot of duties in the castle, and kept them protected at all times. Finally, we come to the peasants. They were at the bottom of the triangle. However, without these peasants, feudalism wouldn't have worked as well as it did. Peasants carried out all the dirty work and did the very hard labor. They were known for being poor, and it was extremely hard to be a peasant and get out of being a peasant. So that practically means that if your family was already peasants and you had an ancestry of peasants, then it was very hard for you to become a knight or a noble because there was no money or no inheritance gained. So it was practically impossible. Now we come to our conclusion. Fiefs and vassals, knights and castles, and the monarchy. These are all key features of European feudalism. Feudalism was complex, but at its basic form, it was a very useful way of governing when people could be very isolated from cities and classic forms of government. It was based on honor and loyalty and debt. When the monarchy came into play and tried to extort the system, it brought about the Magna Carta. Next, we have our questions and answers. The first question is, why did feudalism develop after the fall of the Roman Empire? This is because, without the Roman protection, medieval Europe became a violent place. This happened because there were several foreign invasions, which included Muslim invasions and Viking invasions. The invasions weakened European rulers, which led to nobles fighting for more territory. These nobles created a new political and social system, better known as feudalism. Our next question is, how did the practice of feudalism vary across Europe? Well, this depended on different factors. First, we have Romanization. Central powers were practically very weak. And during the 2nd through 4th centuries, there was a process of gradual de-Romanization of the outer reaches of the Roman Empire. Roman political institutions and cultural norms lost impact on local societies. And this practically describes the barbarianization of the West. And so basically you can see that through the central part of it, everything just collapsed. Now we can talk about the new Germanic societies. This was through people became territorial instead of working as a community. That's basically a way to summarize that up and how that had varied across Europe. Different people had different circumstances of wanting a different type of territory in a certain community. But instead of working together, they went against each other. And the strength of institutions. It was hard for the state to commit to its public duties because the people were so uneducated and the state really couldn't do anything about that. It was hard to stick to their duties. Our next question is, did the characteristics of feudalism change over time? The answer to this is yes. Feudalism eventually failed. It worked for many years, but it didn't work because the weaker nobles, the Black Death, and the Crusades. These are our primary sources that we used. And finally, our works cited. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed our project.